Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody liked the previous show as well as I did. Tank is a great addition to the family, and what a panel tonight. And we'll start saying hello to everybody in chat, of course. Little Twisted, first in, thank you. Hey, Michelle, how we doing? Mr. Griff, Mary's on board. Hi, Mary. So I'm going to apologize up front. I have a nasty cold and also have an ear infection in my right ear. So I am like totally deaf. So if you hear me say, what? Slap me because I'm being stupid. If I say, sorry, I can't hear you, that's totally legit. But there was no way I was canceling with the guests we've got tonight. So, tonight's going to be a fun night because of course, we're going to talk a little Bigfoot with this guy, but there's a lot about him that he doesn't get credit for. And he and I have, oh no, that's not good. I hope you feel better. Thank you, Mary. Appreciate it. Yeah, everything's just driving me nuts because it's like a loud siren in my ear, but just pressure. So, yeah, exactly. Twisted. That's Southern redneck, deep hillbilly stuff there. Let everybody slide in because we do not want to miss a moment with this guest. He and I actually have a lot more in common than just Bigfoot. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we have in common on both areas. Everybody's going to get a little information. Hey, Lenny, how you doing? So we're going to start Christmas with maybe a little hint on trying to keep off those holiday 15, they call them. Rebecca's here. Good. It's your turn to drive the truck because I'm busy. I'm on lunch. So tonight we got a man who is well published, Bigfoot knowledge beyond belief, historical Bigfoot knowledge, which is very cool. Hey, Jeff, how we doing? And we're going to bring him out. So everybody say hi to Russell. I know he's been on, but trust me, this guy's still got more information than we're ever going to get in a couple shows. So there's Russell.
Hello.
How we doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
How's the weather where you're at?
It's real windy, so I hope I don't lose the power.
Yeah, we've had a couple times where I've seen you go dark, so hopefully we'll keep our fingers
35 degrees.
At what?
35 degrees.
Oh, you're almost as cold as Michigan then. That's not usual for you guys, is it? Yeah, a little twisted says, oh, I better quit eating chocolate chip cookies because Russell and I are, believe it or not, going to talk a little bit about fitness because it's something we do share a passion for. I've been doing it since 1984, lifting. When I first saw my substitute teacher who looked like the Hulk, he was only 5'5", but 24-inch arms. So that was what got me into lifting. I started working in the gym in 1986 and have been with it ever since because you get to help people on a one-on-one and you get to make a difference in people's lives, even to this day. So even though I'm technically a retired personal trainer, I still give out information. I still do a little coaching. I just don't charge for it. Well, Russell, on the other hand, let's hear how Russell got involved.
Yeah, well, I of course worked for the Forest Service and did a lot of other things too in my life. But later on, a few years before I retired, I got into the fitness area and worked for a big gym as a fitness consultant and set up personal training for 8 trainers that I had under me, as well as myself. I was certified with 2 different organizations as a bodybuilder and was excited about doing that. And I enjoyed it a lot. I got to work with a lot of, because I could set it up for myself, which was nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I could work with the college athletes. I worked with a lot of basketball players with injuries. I worked with football players, a hockey goalie I worked with for a number of years, and so forth. So,
Get twisted. So what led you to going
what's
into
that?
that? From forestry to that? That's kind of a leap.
Well, I was interested in it. I had purchased Arnold Schwarzenegger's book, and I read through that, and I was really interested. I saw some of his bodybuilding contests he was in, and so forth, and I kind of jumped in and started at the just a basic level, and then worked on getting my certification, and then I got an opportunity to be um, the head person, handing out the personal training to my different trainers. I would set them up with people that I thought they would work well with, and so forth. And
So you actually got
very,
this.
it's very satisfying work, especially working with people who have injuries or have some kind of a disability. It's funny now that here in the last 6 years I've got Parkinson's disease, so it's a muscle type of it's just the way it goes.
Yeah. It seems like no matter how good a shape you're in, if when nature decides to take over, you're kind of at its mercy.
Yep. Yep. So I've have to learn a lot of patience and the things that I can do and can't do, and so that's changed a lot in my life in the last 6 years since I've developed it. But we just but there's plenty of other things I've been able to do. So I do a lot of watercolor painting of wildlife when I have good days, when I'm not so shaky, um, and of course I do Bigfoot research and Sasquatch research, and I've written a book on it, and that I think it's very interesting, and I think it's a different sort of book. It has a lot of short chapters on a lot of things that are related to the subject, and it's made to basically to educate and stimulate the thought process when you're researching and looking into this subject. And that's what my book is about. I mean, it doesn't have a lot of accounts in it. There's a few. Some of the Albert Osterman account obviously is a big one,
Yeah.
and several others. But for the most part, it talks about a lot of different things. I talk about some of the disease possibilities that could have affected Sasquatch, smallpox. There's a couple of other diseases that I looked into that they could certainly catch from deer, fibromosis. So I've got a chapter on that, and I talk about how they could have been affected by the gold rush, obviously in California, British Columbia, Alaska, and how this would affect them as a family group. They went from living a quiet wilderness life to, once gold was discovered, thousands of prospectors came into their area. So there was a lot that had to change. Logging was a big part of it too. I mean, all these miners had to have places, cabins, and they had to build stores, and they had to build sawmills and so forth. On the West Coast and on the East Coast, they were doing the same thing with the forest, to selling during colonial times, especially selling the wood to England, and so it was a huge component of the economy on the East Coast. Where the West Coast, it was more out of necessity for all the people that was going into that area. shipbuilding that was going on at the time also was important. And so these are all things that I talk about in my book to various degrees. And like I said, to try to stimulate the thought process of people who are looking into this, the history of the Sasquatch. The Hudson Bay Company is another big one. I mean, that was early on. A lot of those people at that time period didn't read or write, so there's limited stuff that's written down, but there is some accounts that are very interesting. Native Americans, there's a lot of accounts there. So there again, all of these little pieces are things I touch in my book in a small way, and it's meant to stimulate the thought process and help out to get you started if you're going into research in some particular area. So that's what my book's about.
Yeah, I mean, you got to learn from history, otherwise, and if you can learn from hints from the past, it would make trying to track one down in the present a little more, I don't want to say predictable, but a better chance, we'll say, because obviously the hide and seek champs of the world have stayed hidden this long for a reason. So Rebecca has a question. It'd be awesome to hear your opinion. Wonder if they ever found gold precious or useful as far as the big.
I don't think so. I don't think that they were. There were certain foods that they were interested in, that they did trade with the Native Americans, but as far as precious metal goes, they had. I don't see that there was any interest or any sign that they were trading or involved in that in any way, other than being pushed around by all the miners that came into their area and logged it and mined it and panned all the streams and
yeah,
yep,
dynamite. And I think that's where 8 Canyon came from, because if I remember right, they were looking for gold.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The guys that were there. Yeah. And they were actually had a mine where they weren't doing so much panning where they needed to use the streams and stuff. Theirs was more of a mine. Where a big part of the California and British Columbia gold rush, and Alaska as well, was panning and sluice boxes and then the more destructive water blasting that they did and so forth to uncover the gold. Not so much for mining it necessarily, going underground. But.
Yeah, I wonder how much effect dynamite had on them. That had to have been a creative first experience for the Bigfoot.
Yeah, I'm sure they had a lot of first experiences because of, they'd been seeing the Native Americans. And so that's what they were used to. Well, suddenly these white men and a lot of men from China came here. They were big in building the roadways that were necessary to get wagons and supplies and equipment into this backcountry. Some of the really tremendous road projects that went on was very valuable to get it back into that country so that they could get all their supplies and everything they needed to support there again, the stores popped up that had all the equipment and stuff they needed as well. And they had to have food and all of that stuff that you're talking about, thousands of people who suddenly appeared within 6 months time period in this area.
It was that short. That's right. The gold mine was quite the explosion, wasn't it?
Yep.
So you got the houses going up. It's not like we respected the land too much. We were cutting everything down to make the trails.
Yeah, there's a lot of pictures in my book where it shows where they clear cut everything. And they were making charcoal as well. And they were using the wood to build all these buildings, and they used it some of it was actually used in road building as well. And so they strip cut everything, and it was all sawmilled up and And of course, they burned firewood, and so everything got. So the Sasquatch had to adapt. So he had to move out of the area to get into a different area. And, but I think that they did adapt because after the gold rush was over and the gold miners moved out of that area, the farmers moved in because the land was all clear cut and ready for farming. So when they came in and started farming, they had their animals, their chicken, their sheep, their cows and horses, but they also had lots of crops that they grew, corn and squash and just all the different foods that they were growing. And I think that the Sasquatch was able to adapt and take part in getting some of that food from them, stealing it, in other words, and being able to use it. So that was a part of a learning process that the Sasquatch had to evolve through because of the situation that he was in with the farmers moving into the area. So they brought, grew apple trees and berry bushes and stuff that he may not have seen before, but certainly things like corn and larger crops that covered a lot of what the farmers were doing was something that benefited him, the Sasquatch, and he had to evolve or get used to it, and because it was something that he had not had before, the farmers moved in the area. So
so kind of a win one lose one situation. You lost your home, but you gained a whole bunch of new food as long as you could stay out of sight.
Yep. So they moved into a more wilderness area to try to stay out of sight, but yet they would come down to the farmland and steal the foods and stuff. The Russians did a couple of excellent reports, expeditions and reports on the Almasi, and the situation they were in was very similar. Once you get out of the mountains, down in where the streams were and so forth, they did a lot of logging, and then the farmers moved in there, and so they did a couple of really good papers on studying the Almasi coming in and stealing sheep and stealing different crops that they were growing and so forth, and the farmers would see them regularly, so they were able to get a lot of information that was firsthand knowledge. I mean, they were able to see them actually eating food, which is not something you see very often in accounts that we hear. It's pretty rare that you hear an account where you actually see a Sasquatch eating something. Osterman is one that he obviously did. Rowe was another one that was very good, seeing him actually eat something. But most of the time, it's not something that you hear of in the reports.
No, normally it's a grab and run around here. You hear about them snatching a piggy and taking off over the fence, or in my case,
and Native Americans were drying a lot of salmon and so forth on the West Coast, and so they would steal that. The Native Americans would quite often leave all the innards and stuff on the riverbank for the Sasquatch, so that he would stay away from their camp where they were trying to dry all the fish they had gotten.
Which makes a lot of sense. Leave them probably what they're going to eat anyway, which is the most nutritious part. And just like when you bag a deer and field dress it, try to get it out of there before any of the other predators come in. So we have My Block Sunny One. I wonder if Bigfoot ever used ayahuasca like the Native Americans.
I'm unfamiliar with that plant. I assume it's a plant. They were big in eating a camas grass, and it was actually the tubers that they were eating. That was one of the things that the Native Americans in British Columbia ate great quantities of as well. And it was considered something that they traded between tribes. Next to dried salmon, the camas grass was the second most traded between the different tribes. So Sasquatch appears to have traded with them by trading them herbs and medicine plants and so forth in exchange for this camas grass, the tubers that the Native Americans would crush and boil and then create these pieces of bread. It's like a big chip, and they were able to store it that way. But that was something that Sasquatch did trade for, and there is quite a number of accounts of them trading medicine type plants that the Native Americans were looking for. So
I don't know how to explain ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, I know they use like in South America where people actually pay to go down, and it's almost like an hallucinogenic, but it's supposed to let you see into your own like subconscious and stuff. Like, remember Dorian Yates, the bodybuilder?
um,
He was
no, I
Mr.
don't.
Olympia in 92 through 97.
Okay,
Anyway, once he couldn't figure out what was wrong. He had to quit bodybuilding because of an injury.
okay,
And mentally, he was just a wreck because he quit the gear cold turkey. And for some reason, something told him to go down, and he did this ayahuasca experience. It cost thousands of dollars, I forget. And all of a sudden, you wind up vomiting violently for a while first before you go into those like almost meditative state. And then what happens with him was it was almost like he was talking to another version of himself, where it was like, man, you're all effed up. Your hips are hurting, your shoulders are hurting. What are you doing to yourself? You need to pull back and relax. And so when he woke up, he had like this all new sense of well-being, which totally shifted him away from bodybuilding to now he's down to, I think, 225 pounds from 280, and into health and fitness, or just a fitness lifestyle, into medicinal smoke, we'll say. And the ayahuasca experience, he actually takes several people 2 or 3 times a year to these things. So I don't know, Bigfoot needs I don't know how the Native Americans use it. I know how they did it in South America. So I don't know if Bigfoot would eat that or not. More than once anyway.
yeah. I wouldn't think that they would be into something like that would kind of dull their senses,
Yeah.
which would make them more vulnerable to being seen or attacked or something. But but it's possible. I just don't know that much about it. So
How was that experience spelled? Rebecca, I guess the guess way would be hallucinogenic. That's about the best way I can come up with. I don't know a whole lot other than what I'm watching on TV with these people. So let's jump back to fitness, because you mentioned you actually saw the Austrian oak pose on stage. You went to the
um,
shows?
I went to a number of shows. Yep. I wasn't into the showing part, so I didn't do that. I had some people that I worked with that um, they were athletes and they wanted to try to do the bodybuilding program and get involved with the shows. So I worked with them and helped them get through the shows and set up their programs and so forth. So I went to a number of them, but um, they're interesting. I mean, there's a lot of guys in particular that were um,
Arrogant?
overly overly muscled, where they may have been using some substance to get to that point. I think that the natural training is is what anybody should have been looking for.
Yeah.
But I think that there was a number of people that went to those shows that were using substances that enhanced their workouts to the point that they were incredibly over muscled. And consequently, they had nagging little injuries.
Yeah.
It's funny how when one muscle gets bigger than the counter muscle, that there is they pull muscles and they damage the fibers and stuff. So they tended to have more of those type of injuries than the people that use the natural training process. So
I'm not afraid to say it. They're juiced to the gills.
yes.
And I can tell you for a fact that I think the Olympia started in, what was it, 56 or 65, that not one of them have been natural. They've all taken at least testosterone.
Yeah.
And the injuries you talk about are, a lot of it has to do with the fact that muscle strength builds this fast and your tendon strength only half as fast.
Right.
So muscle gets to the point where it just snaps a tendon.
Yeah,
or
and quite often the one muscle and the counter muscle didn't develop equally because they trained one muscle more than another because it looked better. So
yep.
So that if you do a lot of bicep work and you got tremendous biceps, if your tricep isn't good, then you're going to end up with some injuries. You're going to pull muscles and stuff when you're trying to do your program. Because of there's just a balance there that has to be maintained, or you get these injuries. So
exactly.
You didn't tend to get that as often when you trained without being on the juice. So
hey, Squatch Man. Yeah, that's the juice really does wild things to the body, and unfortunately now, because back then it was legal to do it,
right?
The doctors were more than willing to write the scripts, and Arnold finally came out and said, I take 3D-ball before a workout, and so that at least he finally came out. Everybody's kind of waiting for that one. But what do you think's the big swing now compared to when we were lifting to what's going on today?
Well, I don't follow it as much today as I did when I was involved with it. So I think that it's developed to the point where the bodybuilders look freaky. They're just too big, and so they look like they can't hardly walk because their legs are so big and their shoulders are so big that their knuckles are dragging on the ground. I mean, they just don't look right.
Exactly.
And you didn't see that back in the earlier days, not to that extent.
No, I mean, guys like, I think Sergio Oliva was the first guy. For those who don't know, he was a guy that actually beat Arnold once.
Yep.
I think he was the one that kind of pushed that direction. And then Arnold got even bigger, so it kind of kept going until Arnold retired. And then you got Frank Zane, who was only 180 pounds. And I mean, just an Adonis, but then turned around, and then everybody wanted to see the circus freaks. So everybody just kept trying to get bigger and bigger. And
they did. And they did. And they got bigger and bigger. And their legs got so big that they were bigger than their waist. It's like, that doesn't look right.
No, I mean, when I was really following well at the time in the late 70s and 80s, the ideal physique was the same neck, arm, and calf measurement. 17 inches of piece. That was probably going to guarantee you a nice flowing physique. But now you got guys with 20-inch necks and 26-inch arms and 32-inch thighs.
Oh yeah, it's incredible.
I mean,
Some of the workouts they go through and the amount of weight that they're doing with squats and stuff is, I mean, back in the day when I was dealing with it, if you were squatting 300-400 pounds, you were doing that was a good workout. Now people are doing 1,000 pounds. I mean, the numbers are just off the chart what people are doing, um, and
yeah.
they just keep getting bigger and bigger. And
And the other thing that's off the chart though is the mortality rate.
yes,
Guys are passing away at 24, 25, 32. Anybody
yeah,
from the 90s, your average
that's
lifespan is 46.
yeah, that's the cortisol that's in their system. The cortisol is very damaging drug that's in your system, and it's corrosive to your system. And there's a lot of things that can affect that. Some of um, the things that they take certainly affects it, but it's also corrosive for things like, if um, you're just impatient, or you've got a lot of stress from your job and stuff like that. That stimulates the cortisol, and it does a lot of damage to your body. And you want to keep that in check so that it doesn't happen. But when you're taking the juice and stuff, it affects it for sure, and that is certainly plays a part in people dying early. So,
Yeah. Well, first thing, Squatch Wham wants to make sure we tell Russell hello,
hi,
please.
hi, Squatch man. Hope you're doing well. I
Yeah, the
see some
cortisol.
pictures. I see some pictures of trucks you're working on, so I know you're still doing the mechanic stuff.
Aussie a renter.
Yep, yep, yeah. He builds, puts new engines in, and does all kinds of stuff. And he's got a special truck he takes Bigfooting, and yep,
We need pictures of that.
yeah.
I mean, I remember the original Bigfoot truck when it had, what was it, like 44s. That was big, at the time, but now they're
Oh, right.
8 foot
Now they're so
tires.
big. There again, they went the same way as the bodybuilders. The
Yeah,
trucks got
exactly.
bigger, tires got bigger. The tires are now taller than the truck is. It's like,
Yeah. Tip over all the time, and nobody seems to care about having to fix it. It's like
that's right.
top heavy,
Yeah, they put
genetically
on a good
modified.
show.
Yeah. So what's your next project? What do we got coming up?
Well, I'm working on a project of another book that I'm writing. I'm working on with my aunt, and we're dedicating it to my dad who's passed away. But it's about a shipyard in the area where my dad grew up, and it was before not during his time period. We're talking 1780s to 1860s. This shipyard was in operation, and was one of the larger shipyards in Massachusetts, Rhode Island. It did cover both areas, and employed a lot of people, and actually created some of their own money that they paid the people with that worked in the shipyard, and then they went to the store that the company owned and redeemed their copper coins they had given them to buy stuff at the shipyard store. So it was a a really good way for all those people that lived there and worked in the shipyard. It was when other people didn't have work, and um, then there was little money going around. So they were really benefited from it. So we're writing a book on that and about the history of that shipyard. So
So
that's kind
aside
of a
from
project I'm doing. I also do some magazine articles. Backwoodsman magazine. I write for them occasionally. I've done I think the last magazine they had one article of mine in it, and the one before they had three. So I write for them as well, and I do some Sasquatch articles for other magazines as well. So So that keeps me busy. I can't get
Yeah.
out with my Parkinson's. I kind of limited how far out I can get out into the field to work, but I can get out and do some. But for the most part, I spend more time buried in front of the computer, looking, researching, trying to ask questions and try to find answers to things that, I can't get the answer to.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. You got to still moving Earth to find it.
yes, yeah. So that keeps me pretty busy. And during the summer, I don't handle the heat very well. So staying inside there again on the computer. And this time of year with the leaves off is more when I get out a little bit more and try to, look for sign and so forth. But there again, it's pretty limited. I have some days I can't do it, and other days I can. So it's kind of a funny disease. Some days I have a difficult time working the computer and working the mouse, and other days it's a non-issue. So I kind of have to do what I do when I'm dependent on how I feel. If I can't use the computer, but I can go out with my chainsaw and I can cut firewood. So it's not a fine thing that I'm doing. So I can do it that way. So, but
Yeah, make the best of what you can on that given day.
yep,
Literally
that's
living
right.
every day. So that's a good lesson for people right there anyway, is take what the day will give you.
That's right. Yep. Yep. I mean, you can't do everything, but you can try to set goals, and you got to have a lot of patience with this disease too. It takes a lot of patience to be able to. I like to do my watercolor paintings as well. I have some of those. If you go to my site on Facebook, you can see there's I don't know, like 100 different paintings I've done, and I sell a lot of them. I sold over 100. But and I do mostly wildlife, but I do some portraits and some other miscellaneous things, barnyards and mountains, grizzly bears, and so forth. But
And you do watercolor?
yeah, I do watercolor. Yeah,
Ooh,
I
that's
like
even more.
watercolor because I can do the whole picture in 4 or 5 hours. If I can take my medicine enough to keep me from shaking during that time, I can complete it. If I can't, then I come back when I can and finish it up. But oil painting takes several days to do a painting. Layers of paint need to dry before you can paint other layers over it and so forth. Where watercolors, you don't have that entanglement to deal with. So I can do, a painting in just a few hours sometimes, depending on the subject matter. So
What medium do you use? Do you use like the wine paper or?
I do paper. Yeah, that's all I paint on is paper.
Yeah.
And then I make my own frames. I've got a little woodworking shop, and I make my own, usually maple or black walnut, and make my frames out of that. And I cut my own glass, and I get recycled glass from a dump that has it there, and so I cut it myself. And so I save a lot of money that people spend once they buy a painting and they go to a frame shop, and the
Yeah.
frame is very expensive, and the glass and the mat that you have to have is stuff that you end up buying after you purchase the painting. But when you purchase it from me, it'll be complete, ready to hang on the wall. I do all that stuff for you and save you a lot of money, unless you're looking for something really fancy.
No, that's a great way, one-stop shop. Because it can be a real pain in the butt to try to go out and find the right mat, find the right frame.
That's right. Yeah. And then the
Yeah.
frames are very expensive too. I mean, you can spend $100, $200 on a frame for a painting that you only spend $50, $60 for. So, you know, um, they're very expensive.
Yeah, I've got a couple pictures that I bought, and I like to do pen and ink. So there's a
Mhm.
couple, I messed around with and want to frame, but like you said, they're so expensive It's like Victor was asking, what part of the country are you in?
I'm in southwestern Virginia. I'm very close to Jefferson National Forest, which is one of the biggest forests in the country. And there are family groups living there. I'm about 4 hours from the Smokies. I used to work for the Forest Service, so I worked over in the Smokies quite a bit. Um, so I'm close to that. That's another area where there certainly are family groups of Sasquatch living there. And I'm probably about 6 hours away from the Uray National Forest in North Carolina, which is another place that is fairly well known for family groups that have been seen in that area and research that goes on in that area by a lot of people. But yeah, southwestern Virginia. I'm not too far from Mount Airy, North Carolina.
Are you up in elevation? That's why it's so cold?
I'm about 2,000 feet. I'm a little above 2,000 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
The elevations
everything,
around me are probably around 3,000 feet. So I'm a little below. I'm not at the mountaintops, but close to the Blue Ridge Parkway. That's another area that gets sightings quite often. People see it crossing the road. Crossing the road is probably the most common place that Sasquatch is seen. But I begin to realize that they're such an interesting. They're so curious creatures that they seem to be unafraid to come into a campground and poke around, maybe stealing some food, maybe not, maybe just coming in. It almost seems like they come in sometimes just to have fun, to stir up the campers, and with no intention of doing anything else. Mary Green, the Tennessee Bigfoot woman who's passed away, I've got a couple of her books. Her books are excellent. They're hard to find, though. So if you ever see one, don't wait. Purchase it, whatever it costs, because she only made 100 books of each of the ones that she has done. She had 3 different books, but she spoke about them playing practical jokes on her. I mean, they knew that when she'd started up her wood stove in their cabin, that they would come around and open the ash pit door that was on the outside of the chimney outside the cabin. And as soon as they opened that door, it caused the draft to change so the smoke would go into the house. So she would come out and she saw what had been done, and she'd close the ash door and put a cement block up against it. And then she'd go back inside. Well, sure enough, it wasn't 20 minutes later, there was smoke coming in, and they'd move the block and open the door again. And the only reason to do something like that is for entertainment. I mean, let's face it. I mean, they're not getting anything to eat. They're not learning anything. It's like they're just doing it for entertainment. And she had a number of different issues she talked about in her books that was like that. Window peeking is very common among Sasquatch. They're very curious creatures. But that's that kind of stuff is really interesting because they're doing it just to have fun.
yeah, and that's what, if something is as intelligent as we think they are, they're going to get bored. They're like, well, let's get with the little hairless monkey and see how many times we can make her come out of the house.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean,
Or let's go into a campground and throw sticks and stuff at the tents and get people stirred up and but stay out of sight. And
yeah, a friend and I were out, and it was near a highway. It was in where we normally go, and we heard a scream, wah! And then the dog across the street would start barking. As soon as the dog quit barking, you heard another scream. The dog would start barking. This went on for like 20 minutes until finally the owner came out and fired a shot in the air, and then it went all quiet. But he was doing nothing more than getting that dog barking.
Yep.
It's like,
Yep, there
you
are a
know,
number of accounts like that are really interesting because there was no purpose to that other than entertainment on their
yeah,
part, and that's exactly what it was. And so, I mean that takes a thought process. I mean, you know, you don't just do something and then see the result, and the result was that the person was upset or something, whatever. I mean, that was a thought process that they knew that if I go and open this ash door, that she'll come out and close it and then go back in the house. And if I open it again, she'll come out. And so they know that's a thought process. Um,
yeah. I
that's
mean,
that's
it's
pretty amazing.
to me, it shows feelings, entertainment. You know, they
Yeah.
get joy, getting joy out of it, laughing.
Yes. Yep.
So that's what makes what, and everybody seems to be asking this question, and so of course I'm going to pop you with it. You know, what type of beings do you think they are?
Well, they're flesh and blood. Um, that I feel comfortable with. They do seem to have some special gifts. Um, I would call it gifts, but there's so much of it that we don't understand or know about it. It's hard to really nail down. I mean, they talk about the the ability for them to cloak, um, and I often wonder if it's more that their frequency is something that they're able to um, adjust, however they can do it, that allows them to just be move out of the eyesight range of the human being, which is very small on the eye vision scale. What your eye can actually see is very small area. And if they're in that area and then they can change something to do with their frequency, then they only have to do it just a little bit and they move out of the area where you can see it. So if you could, if you saw a Sasquatch standing in front of you, and then he was able to get out of your vision range, you could still reach out and touch him, and he would still be there, but you just can't see him. So I'm not sure that I would really call it that he cloaks. He takes advantage of the eyesight range of the human being, you know, and that's one thing I think, but there's a lot of other things too. The infrasound is real. They have that. Whether they seem to be able to turn it on and off when they want, but I think it's more than that too. But um, there's a lot of people that talk about orbs and things with them too, and there again, I don't have enough information to really talk on that
Hmm.
very much because there's so much we don't know about these orbs and so forth. But basically, they're flesh and blood, and I think that there are at least three different varieties. And I compare it to the canine family. When you look at the canine family, you got your wolf, you got your coyote, you got your fox. And if Sasquatch is in the same uh, family group, then they would have three different types of Sasquatch. The one that was similar to a wolf, there was one that's like a coyote, and one like a fox. The fox is a different color than the other two. The foods they eat are different. All those type of things. So what I'm saying is that I think there are three different, and one may be more human looking than others. Um, there again, some may be more comfortable with people than others. I mean, we have such a wide range of territory that they live in as well. I mean, you have Sasquatch that basically lives in the mountains and stays out of sight and eats the food sources that he collects in that area. There's other Sasquatches that are near the sea coast. And so they have a totally different diet. They eat shellfish, they eat fish that wash ashore in the tide, they eat ducks, they eat geese, they eat things that are common with the seashore. So their whole diet is different. So I mean, those are little things that create two different varieties, just based on um, location of where they live. Um, and then there's the third one that I would consider is probably the Alaskan
Oh, yeah.
one, which is considerably larger, which he needs to be because of the weather up there, and maybe not as friendly. Um, but I think that there's no question that they have a language. Um, Ron Moorhead, he's got the tapes. Ron was kind enough to write the foreword to my book as well, which was really exciting for me. I'm really proud he was able to do that for me. It meant a lot for me. But he has done that, and they've done a lot of work with the Sierra Sounds, and they found that there's language there, and so forth. So whether an East Coast Sasquatch can speak to a West Coast Sasquatch, I don't know. I mean, if you look at the Native American tribes, you would have the same problem because they wouldn't be able to speak because their languages would be different. So I would compare it to that probably. But there are some things that are very seem very common between the East Coast and the West Coast Sasquatches. So I don't know. There again, there's so many questions that we can't answer because we don't have enough information. And these people that have the witness sightings is valuable information, but how many of them did we actually get written down? There aren't a tremendous amount. A lot of people don't come forward. I spoke at the 2016 Virginia Bigfoot Conference, and I had people come up to me talking to me about sightings that they never told anybody about. And there was a large number of people. And that was all information that I absorbed and that I would have never had access to if I hadn't been there and met these people. So that cuts down on how you can answer questions if you don't have all the data, and we don't. So we look for similarities, we look for things to compare, and try to put together a vision of what we think we're dealing with, and then deal with the issues that are, well, how do we explain this, or how do we explain that, or why do they do this and they don't do that, and so forth. I mean, it's just there's a lot to it. I mean, for sure. So, and that's why my book has so many chapters. I mean, I have, gosh, I don't even remember now offhand. Like there's 40 different chapters in there because I speak about so many different things that either could affect them or does affect them, and stuff that we don't know whether it affected them or not. Smallpox in the 1700s was a big killer to the Native Americans, and it wiped out a huge amount in British Columbia. When the gold rush started up there too later on in the 1860s. So whether Sasquatch was affected by that, it's very likely he could have been. And so his population would have shrunken and it would have taken a while to start to come back. So
yeah, it totally makes sense. And I love the way you're able to take all the scientific stuff and put it in layman's terms so a simple like me can understand this.
well, that's not always easy to do, to break stuff down like that, and so sometimes you have to stay with the scientific stuff, and it makes it difficult to understand.
No, you do a great job. I got to get my book. I got to get your address so I can send that and get that autograph for you too.
Yep, I'll definitely do that for you. Yep.
I had a question for you. Alaska, I was going to go back to that one. Do you think they're bigger and meaner up there, just not only because of the terrain, but maybe the competition for food? You get grizzlies and brown bears.
Probably. No, I think that they're larger in Alaska for, there again, it's the third type that I would call it like the wolf type, because they are they do seem to be larger, and they would have to be. The weather is a lot more uh, difficult for them. Finding food, the bear population and so forth takes its toll on some of that too. But there is other food that's easy to get too. The salmon, during the salmon run, they could be there getting salmon just like the bears can.
Yeah.
So,
I was just wondering about the competition. They'd have to stand their ground and beat the bear out, or one or the other.
yeah, and there again, they seem to be a little less friendly. They don't seem to be quite so interested in dealing with people and so forth. But on the other hand, I don't think they interact with them as much either. They don't steal their food. They don't um, necessarily get involved with them. Where the other two types that I'm talking about, the coyote type and the red fox type, are deal with people better because they are obviously closer to larger groups, and they seem to, like I said, like we've talked about, they seem to have fun with poking fun at us sometimes and so forth, which I don't think you see from the bigger models up in Alaska.
Yeah. So I'm taking a shot in the dark here, but would you say the medium size are basically mid United States up, like Michigan, Washington, where the colder weather is, and then like the skunk ape would be the third type, the fox down south?
Um, yeah, I think that you could kind of break it down more like the East Coast and West Coast,
Oh,
and then across the country that way. I think the largest ones you're going to see, you're going to have to get up into probably the middle of Canada on up into the Yukon and Northwest Territories and then Alaska and those areas up there to find the bigger ones. But I think even the ones that probably Dr. Meldrum was dealing with at Snell Grove Lake up in Ontario was probably the medium-sized ones. More of an East Coast variety, and there again, not quite so. Um,
yeah, and I've sent you pictures of the tracks. You've seen the 23 inches. So maybe I think I got Shaquille O'Neal and Sasquatch out in my area because that one's a big boy. Most of them are normally right around 17 to 18 inches, right? So 7, 8 feet.
Yep. Yeah, I have a track that I had cast when I was living in Vermont from a friend of mine cast it in Ontario, and that one was 18 inches. So that's a pretty good size one. Most of the tracks that I've seen or have been able to cast, a lot of them you can't cast, but some you can, but are typically 15, 16 inches. But
It'll get behind here. Yeah, I mean that's still 7, 8 feet. And then what? Unless you get this, I've only got to see two of them where they were in softer ground, so you could appreciate how heavy something was to
yeah,
make
they
that.
they are heavy, and that's another thing when people talk about them being up in trees and stuff. And I think that there are certain situations that they will get into a tree, but you have to remember, I mean, if they're 7 or 8 feet tall and they weigh 400 to 600 pounds, the tree limbs aren't capable of holding them very much. Some down near the ground they might be able to climb up in and they could jump off to catch prey or something, but typically your branches can't handle that kind of weight.
Sonny's asking, Bigfoot could be immune to things humans aren't because they live with nature, or maybe
Mm,
know more of the medicinal.
they
Uh,
could, yeah. They obviously have a knowledge of medicine plants. Now, whether that was something that they learned or was given to them or something, or if the Native Americans pass that information on to them, it's hard to know which came first, the chicken or the egg. I think that they probably had this knowledge um, imparted to them in some fashion, and so they understood what these medicine plants were and what they could be used for, and certainly they were able to probably use them to stay healthy. But whether or not they could use them to counteract something like smallpox probably is not something that they were able to do. And I tend to think because of the lack of citing reports and stuff during that time period, that the smallpox was a major component in damaging the Native American tribes. I tend to think that they probably were affected as well. And so their population shrunk during that time period. And then I think that it came back some. If you notice some of the interesting research I've done, when you look at the Albert Ostman account, that was in the 1920s. William Rowe's account was a little later, but there were several accounts that were in the 1920s. Fred Beck, his accounts on Mount St. Helens, that was in the 1920s. And there was 3 or 4 more. What's his name? Harvey. I can't think of his first name now, but he was somebody that also was picked up and carried off by a Sasquatch. That was in the 1920s as well. So that may have been more of a peak in their population at that time, having been lost a lot of the population in the 1860s and 1870s from the smallpox, particularly from the gold rush areas in British Columbia and Alaska.
Yeah, because it makes you wonder how many were not only displaced but offed.
It was both, right? They were displaced and they were passed away. Yep. And Mary Green talks about in her book, she had a Sasquatch that his name was Fox, and he was somebody that she fed and she was on good terms with and so forth. And she actually was one of a small group of people who were allowed to come to the encampment where Fox was dying. It's unknown exactly what his issue was. Mary talks about his foot and lower leg being very bloody and very swollen, and it looked like it was infected and so forth. And they obviously knew that they didn't have the plants or medicine necessary to save him. They knew he was passing away. So the group allowed these 3 or 4 people to come and see him and bring him gifts. He liked chewing tobacco and a number of other things, garlic and stuff. And they brought those things into him. But when they came to his deathbed, because he was at the end of his time, they noticed that there was a hole dug in the ground, similar in size to what Fox was. And it was dug down about 3 feet. And it was clearly looked like it was going to be his last resting place. So that's very interesting, because as people often ask about that if they bury their dead, and it appears like that was the case in that particular encounter that Mary Green described in her book. So.
I knew the name Mary Green, and once you said Fox, that clip, there was a YouTube channel that actually they did short videos, and actually read her book chapter by chapter, one of them. So yeah. I knew that name, and it's like limited books, okay, and then Fox was like, okay, now I know exactly what you're talking about.
Her first book is Bigfoot is at My Back Door. Her second book, which is, I think it's the best one of the 3, was Night Shadows. And then the last one was 50 Years, where her friend at that time wrote the book with her, whose name escapes me at the moment, but it'll probably come to me. But anyway, that middle book, the Night Shadows, is the one that I think is her best book, if you can ever find it. I've had two in my lifetime of her books, and I sold one, but I still have the original one that I found. I actually found one last year around Christmas time that was for sale, and I hate to tell anybody what I paid for it. It was so cheap, but her books are really tough to find. It was my understanding she made 100 copies of each issue, and she usually signed all of the issues. I've never seen one that wasn't signed. In other words, at least the ones that I've seen. So I know a number of people who do have them, but they won't part with them.
I can't blame them there then.
Yeah, because you won't be able to get another one. It's like
all these people selling their house when the prices are high. It's like, wait a minute, now you got to buy one though. There goes all your profit.
That's right. Yep, and you can easily spend $200 for a book, no problem. It's like, the problem is you can't find it.
Well, I guess we should wrap this up. I know I've taken up a lot of your time, and I really appreciate it. Like I said, you're one of my bucket list guys, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope I can get Russell on.
Well, we can do it again sometime. It's hard to cover everything in a short period of time on the show, and so we can certainly do it again sometime, and maybe we could have some more topics that people want to talk about ahead of time. And we were talking today about one that Victoria Jackson made a question out there about whether Sasquatch stores food, and we got quite a lot of interesting responses to that, and it was a good question, and I think I wrote about a half a page, but Mike Hartman, he had some good information on that too that he brought forward, and he wrote quite a lot on that, and so it was an interesting question, but that's certainly the kind of thing that people would be interested in if we could talk about it but like I said, you could spend an hour just talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. So where can everybody find you? And don't forget, I never sell.
Right. This book you can find. It's on Amazon. You can get it there. I have some on eBay, and those are copies that I sign, and I sell a few there. But Amazon is mostly where most people buy them. That's where you can get my book. You can catch up with me on Facebook. I'm on there. I'm a member of a number of groups, moderator and administrators for some and moderators for others. So that's another place you can catch me. That's pretty much about it. Like I said, I don't get out in the field much, and I don't travel much, so it's hard for me to get to conferences and stuff. I would sure like to go to a couple, but I can't arrange to get there and back. So, because I can't drive much at all anymore, I just drive short distances, very short. So, but that's the best way to get me. Probably is on Facebook. So.
All right. Will you be able to hang out with me backstage for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to send us out then, and I'll talk to you back there. So from me, and I'm guessing Russell, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
And everybody have a great night. And as Grizzlies would say, coast to coast, around the world, have a good night, have a good holiday, and everybody stay safe and peace and love.